Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and stablisheth a city by iniquity.
The question of genocide in U.S. history remains an important question, given that the near obliteration of its indigenous peoples remains one of the formative events in this nation's history. As in many other Western Hemisphere nations, the Native American population cataclysm here in the United States played a foundational role in facilitating the conquest and the colonization of millions of square miles, the real estate and vast cornucopia of natural resources upon which this country was built.
Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it, because it is in the power of their hand. And they covet fields and take them by violence, and houses and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage.
This is rugged territory we're going to cover this evening. And you may find yourself overwhelmed by men's inhumanity to man, and by cruelty, and by unspeakable horror. If someone in your row needs to get up and leave, I ask that you just kindly let them go. You might want to just go outside and get a breath of fresh air or say a prayer. And if after a few minutes it's too much, you don't have to come back. My feelings will not be hurt. The ceremony continued until just before dawn. Illuminated by a central fire, the dancers moved together to ancient rhythms. The women's clamshell necklaces, as you see here in this photograph, clicking softly against their seashell dresses. Dancing next to them were men attired in the regalia of deer, foxes, and hunters, supporting the women. These clothes were heavy. Finally, the hour grew late, and the dancers walked away from the central council fire, arm in arm, and they made their way into snug redwood houses through round doors. They lay down next to kith and kin and visiting people from neighboring tribes, unaware that just 7 miles away in the town of Crescent City, militiamen were gathering with the intent to destroy them. Crescent City's Coast Rangers and Klamath Mounted Rangers were state militia units that had been heavily armed by the state of California. In the preceding months, they had received dozens of rifles, muskets, and tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition, along with sabers, cutlasses, and bayonets, provided to them by the state of California through donations made by the United States Army in California. In the pre-dawn hours, as the Nidash celebrants slept, Taloa, Yurok, Kuruk, and others, 116 of these militiamen, accompanied by an unknown number of volunteer auxiliaries from the Smith River Valley, slowly encircled the village. They took up positions concealed behind the brows of sand dunes, or hidden in the brush, or in the shadows of outcroppings of rock. And as the sun rose over the redwood-clad hills of the Coast Range, women, men, and children emerged from those redwood houses to begin their day. And as they did so, said one eyewitness participant later, "We shot them down. We shot them down. Just as fast as we could reload our weapons." That morning, hundreds of people lost their lives. When the screaming and the shooting finally came to an end, only one of the attackers was wounded. Based upon the systematic and intentional physical annihilation of indigenous people, scholars need to reevaluate some of the fundamental axioms that today guide our understanding of California history. For example, scholars could revisit the assumption that they have that it was diseases, that is, the passive process of colonization, rather than active policies like state-sponsored mass murder, that were the leading causes of death and ultimately of this massive population catastrophe. Now, sporadic mass murder punctuated the colonial experience in California before the gold rush. But it was really James Marshall's 1848 gold strike that precipitated a dramatic increase in incidents of killing. And it was particularly miners like this gentleman pictured here who came south from Oregon to mine. These men had no connection to colonial California and to the deep weaving together of Mexican and California Indian peoples, and they largely saw the indigenous people of California as a dangerous obstacle in the way of their path toward the rapid acquisition of gold. In 1849, Oregonians' attacks on California Indians dramatically increased, not only in the number of massacres that they committed, but also in their very lethality, particularly in the central mines, which we see here, which is where the gold rush was first booming. One 49er explained in a diary entry that I found, and I quote, "Oregon people had been used to shooting Indians, and in California, they did shoot them freely." That April, a miner named Theodore Johnson entered the epicenter of this local genocide near Coloma, right where Marshall had first found gold. In his journal, he recounted multiple massacres, homicides, the beheading of California Indian people, and the taking of California Indian people's scalps. There were no newspapers yet in the central mines at this point. So due to spotty primary source coverage, we will never know the precise number of lives lost during these periods. But we do know that between late 1849 and early 1850, hundreds and perhaps thousands of California Indian people suffered violent deaths in the central mines. What was clear to the observers at the time was the genocidal intent of the killers. They spoke of clearing the land of Indians completely, and its impact. Many of these zones did become cleared out of their indigenous peoples. In December of 1849, Pomo and Wapo people living here at Kelsey, what is now Kelseyville, on the shores of Clear Lake, rose up against two men, Stone and Kelsey, who were holding them as slaves. In response to this double homicide, vigilantes and regular United States Army soldiers killed at least 1,000 or more California Indian people between Christmas Day of 1849 and May 15th, 1850. Vigilantes first murdered and massacred large numbers of indigenous farm workers and cattle ranchers in what are now the Napa and Sonoma valleys. And an interesting thing happened here. A counter group of vigilantes rose up, a bigger group, and they arrested these 8 vigilantes, and they brought them down to Benicia, where they were held as prisoners on a U.S. Navy ship. The state of California was just getting itself organized at this point, and so the case of these 8 vigilante Indian killers became the very first case to come before our brand new state Supreme Court. But an odd thing happened. The state Supreme Court justices determined that they could not safely hold these men, and so they let all 8 of them go on bail, and the men were never formally tried. Meanwhile, the United States Army began a major anti-Indian hunting campaign involving elements of infantry, United States cavalry, and also regular United States artillery. They moved in a broad arc up to Clear Lake, killing as they went. And when they reached the northern shores of Clear Lake, something terrible happened. In a San Francisco newspaper article titled "Horrible Slaughter of Indians," a journalist described a massacre committed on an island in the northern portion of the lake, using information provided directly to him by a regular United States Army captain. And I quote, "Little or no resistance was encountered, and the work of butchery was of but short duration. Neither age nor sex were spared. It was the order of extermination, fearfully obeyed. As many as 800 Pomo and Wapo people, almost all women and children, were shot, bayoneted to death, drowned, or beaten to death with the oars of rowboats that morning. Other killings followed. The operation now swung down through the Russian river valley, killing as they went, burning villages to the ground, and lynching people that they found. A new factor was at work. Large-scale, extended Indian killing operations by vigilantes and by the United States Army, tolerated and supported by both federal and state authorities.
Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Edom, and for 4 I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because he did pursue his brother with the sword, and did cast off all pity, and his anger did tear perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever.